The radar screen glows green in the control tower, cutting through the gray weight of peak hour fog. In the headset, static cracks like a warning that refuses to become words. Two aircraft are moving toward the same invisible point in the sky, and the controller's hand stops over the console. This is where most people misunderstand calm. Calm is not soft music. It is not a clean room, a quiet morning, or a life without pressure. Real calm is tested when the next sentence out of your mouth may decide what happens to everyone depending on you. The enemy in that tower is not fear. Fear has useful information. The real enemy is panic-induced paralysis, the moment when the mind sees too much, feels too much, and chooses nothing. So what does samurai discipline teach when the sky is crowded, the fog is thick, and hesitation has a cost? It teaches you how to stand correctly inside chaos. Inside the control tower, there is no room for drama. There is only the radar screen, the headset, the strip bay, the clock, the fog, the voices, the numbers, and the thin invisible geometry of aircraft moving through air they cannot see. The controller does not have the luxury of panic looking like panic. He cannot slam a fist on the desk. He cannot pace the room. He cannot stare out into the fog and wait for courage to return. His fear has to stay hidden behind procedure, behind clipped language, behind a voice that sounds steadier than his pulse. That is what makes this kind of pressure so severe. From the outside, he is sitting in a chair. From the inside, the entire sky has narrowed into a few bright marks on a radar screen. Two planes are converging. Peak hour has filled the airspace with traffic. Fog has lowered visibility until the airport feels less like a place and more like a system of instruments, memory, and trust. Pilots are depending on what they hear. Ground crews are depending on timing. Passengers are depending on strangers they will never meet. And in the headset, the static keeps breaking the edges of every transmission. Then comes the human moment. The body realizes the seriousness before the mind forms a clean sentence. The breath shortens. The jaw tightens. The eyes jump from one data block to another, then back again, as if checking the same information one more time will somehow make it easier to accept. The hand hovers. The mouth opens slightly. The next instruction should come out. But nothing comes. This is panic-induced paralysis. Not panic as noise. Panic as freezing. A strange stillness takes over. The controller is not calm. He is trapped under the weight of too many consequences. His training is still there. His knowledge is still there. The procedure is still there. But for a few dangerous seconds, fear steps between knowledge and action. This is where high-stakes pressure exposes the truth about discipline. Most people think they will rise to the moment because the moment is important. They imagine that urgency will unlock the best version of them. But pressure does not automatically make a person sharper. Pressure often reveals the habits already trained into the nervous system. It reveals whether attention has been practiced or only admired. It reveals whether the mind can return to order when the world stops offering comfort. In the tower, the controller's shadow is not weakness in the simple sense. He is not careless. He is not lazy. He is not unwilling. His weakness is more dangerous because it belongs to responsible people. The fear of making the wrong call becomes so loud that making no call starts to feel safer. But in a crisis, no decision is also a decision. The radar screen does not pause out of sympathy. The aircraft keep moving. The clock keeps cutting the moment into smaller pieces. The static in the headset does not care that his chest feels tight. The fog does not lift because his mind needs another second. And this is where Fudoshin meets Zanshin. Fudoshin is the immovable mind under pressure. Not a dead mind. Not a cold mind. A commanded mind. It is the ability to let fear enter the room without handing it the microphone. Zanshin is the remaining mind, the awake mind, the attention that stays after the first shock. It notices the small details that panic wants to blur. The altitude. The heading. The rate. The call sign. The distance closing on the radar screen. The slight break in a pilot's voice. The exact phrase that must be spoken, not almost spoken. In this tower, the art of Zanshin is not mystical. It is not a peaceful meditation beside a quiet lake. It is awareness with responsibility attached. It is attention that has a job. The undisciplined reaction is easy to understand. The controller sees the conflict and becomes absorbed by the size of it. Two planes. Fog. Peak hour. Static. Consequence. The mind leaps ahead into imagined outcomes, imagined blame, imagined failure, imagined headlines. It leaves the present moment and runs toward everything that could happen next. And the moment it does that, the radar screen becomes less clear. The disciplined reaction does not deny the danger. It reduces the danger into the next correct detail. Call sign first. Heading next. Altitude next. Clear phraseology. Confirm response. Watch the screen. Listen through the static. Repeat if needed. Do not decorate the instruction. Do not explain your fear. Do not ask the moment to become easier. Give the next command. This is the difference between a mind that reacts to pressure and a mind that commands inside pressure. A reactive mind tries to feel safe before it acts. A disciplined mind acts correctly while fear is still present. That is the confrontation. The controller is not confronting the aircraft. The aircraft are simply moving according to speed, heading, altitude, fuel, weather, and instruction. He is not confronting the fog. Fog is not personal. He is not even confronting the static in the headset, though it scratches at his concentration like a dull blade. He is confronting the inner collapse that can happen when responsibility becomes heavier than identity. Because there are moments in life when a person secretly wants permission to become small. Not forever. Just for a second. A second to look away. A second to hope someone else speaks first. A second to blame the noise, the fog, the system, the pressure, the timing. A second to let the body decide that freezing is safer than choosing. But responsibility does not always arrive when you feel ready. Sometimes it arrives through static. Sometimes it appears as a green dot moving across a radar screen. Sometimes it comes at peak hour, when the whole room is already overloaded and every calm voice is one layer away from strain. The controller's training exists for this exact moment, but training is not only the memorization of procedures. Training is the repeated act of returning to the present under pressure. It is the practice of making attention stronger than imagination. It is the practice of keeping language clean when fear wants to make it messy. In the tower, panic tries to widen the crisis until it becomes too large to touch. Discipline narrows it. Not because the crisis is small, but because action must be small enough to perform. One breath. One scan. One instruction. One confirmation. The radar screen becomes more than equipment. It becomes the anchor. At first, it is the object that reveals the threat. It shows the convergence, the closing distance, the hard truth that something must be done now. But as the controller steadies himself, the screen becomes something else. It becomes the place where attention returns. His eyes stop searching for comfort and begin searching for fact. That shift is everything. The static is still in the headset. The fog is still against the glass. The aircraft are still moving. But the controller's mind is no longer trying to escape the pressure by outrunning it. It is back inside the work. This is why samurai discipline does not worship fearlessness. Fearlessness is too often just imagination with a heroic costume on. The better question is this: when fear is present, can your hands still serve the task? Can your voice still carry order? Can your eyes still read what is actually there, instead of what panic is projecting onto the moment? In high-stakes pressure, character is not proven by how intense you feel. It is proven by whether the next necessary action can still pass through you. The controller lowers his hand to the console. He looks at the radar screen again, not as a victim of what it shows, but as a professional responsible for what comes next. The headset hisses. A pilot waits. Another aircraft continues its path through fog. The room has not become peaceful. But peace was never the requirement. Command was. Discipline does not begin after you feel calm. It begins in the first second you realize you are about to lose command. That second is small. Almost invisible. In the control tower, it might look like nothing from across the room. A controller's shoulders stiffen. His eyes hold too long on the radar screen. His fingers stop moving. The headset spits static into one ear, and for half a breath, the mind tries to leave the room. This is where training has to become more than memory. A procedure written in a manual cannot save anyone if the person responsible for using it disappears inside his own panic. The real practice is not pretending the fear is gone. The real practice is staying present while fear is still pressing against the ribs. So the first move is not heroic. The first move is to stop the first wrong move. Do not rush a command just to escape the discomfort of silence. Do not fill the headset with nervous language. Do not repeat the problem to yourself until it grows teeth. The controller catches the freeze as it begins. In his own mind, without drama, he names it panic. Not as a confession. As a fact. Panic is here. Then he returns to the radar screen. The green sweep crosses again. The two targets keep moving. Their data blocks are not symbols of doom. They are information. Altitude. Heading. Speed. Distance. Call sign. The screen becomes the place where the mind is ordered again. This is the second move: anchor the body to the present before commanding the sky. His feet press into the floor beneath the console. His hand touches the edge of the desk. His eyes stop wandering across the whole room and settle into a deliberate scan. One aircraft. Then the other. Then the space between them. The fog outside the glass is ignored because it offers no useful truth. The radar screen offers truth. A panicked mind wants the entire crisis solved in one emotional explosion. A disciplined mind asks, what is the next piece of reality? Not the worst possible outcome. Not the imagined investigation. Not the faces of passengers he will never see. Reality. 2 planes. Closing path. Peak hour. Fog. Static. Need separation. Now the battle must shrink. That is the third move. When pressure becomes too large, the mind becomes useless. It tries to hold the whole sky at once. It tries to carry every consequence, every voice, every future headline, every mistake that could follow. But no human being can act on everything. The controller does not need to solve the rest of his life. He needs the next correct instruction. He identifies the aircraft that must turn first. He checks the heading. He checks altitude. He chooses the cleanest command. Not the most impressive command. Not the command that makes him feel powerful. The command that creates space. Then he speaks. His voice must become a tool. Short. Clear. Usable. Static cuts through the headset, but he does not fight the static emotionally. He listens through it. He speaks through it. If the pilot's readback is unclear, he asks again. Not sharply. Not with irritation. With command. This is another layer of Shugyo, repetition under stress. Scan. Decide. Speak. Confirm. Again. Scan. Decide. Speak. Confirm. The rhythm is not decorative. It keeps the mind from scattering. It prevents panic from turning one crisis into 20 imagined crises. Each step gives the body something exact to do. The radar screen appears again, and now it has changed meaning. At the beginning, it accused him. It showed him the collision course and exposed his fear. Now it trains him. Every sweep is a callback to attention. Every green mark says, return here. Read what is here. Act from here. Zanshin is built this way. Not in comfort. Not after the airport empties. Not when the fog lifts and every runway light is visible. Zanshin is built when attention is dragged back from panic and placed on the smallest detail that matters. The controller watches the turn begin. But he does not celebrate too early. That is the fourth move: stay present after the first correction. Many people lose discipline right after they act. They confuse movement with completion. They make one decision, feel the relief, and mentally step away before the work is done. But in the tower, the next few seconds still matter. The aircraft must respond. The readback must be correct. The radar must confirm separation. The second aircraft may need adjustment. The frequency may still be crowded. So he keeps his eyes on the screen. He does not let relief become another form of distraction. The headset crackles. Another pilot calls. A strip needs attention. A supervisor's shadow may pass behind him. None of that is allowed to steal the center. The controller's task is not to feel better. His task is to remain useful. That is the difference between emotional relief and disciplined command. One wants the pressure to end. The other stays until the duty is complete. Now the ritual begins to hold him. This is the fifth move: turn discipline into a repeatable pattern. In a control tower, ritual does not look like candles or silence. It looks like posture. It looks like phraseology. It looks like checking the screen before speaking. It looks like keeping the voice level when the room tightens. It looks like touching the same edge of the console to remind the body, stay here. Over time, these small rituals become stronger than panic. Not because they erase fear, but because they give fear a boundary. The controller cannot control the fog. He cannot control every burst of static. He cannot undo peak hour. He cannot make the situation less serious by wishing it were smaller. But he can control the next breath before transmission. He can control the discipline of his scan. He can control the cleanliness of his words. He can control whether his eyes return to the radar screen or drift into imagination. That is where command lives. In the next controllable act. This is not just for control towers. Every person has a version of this room. A phone call that changes the day. A family crisis in the kitchen. A supervisor waiting for an answer. A hospital hallway. A bill that cannot be ignored. A mistake that has to be owned before it spreads. The fog may not be outside a tower window, but the mind knows what fog feels like. It knows the blur. It knows the static. It knows the moment when the body wants to freeze and call it caution. The practice is the same. Stop the first wrong move. Name the fear without obeying it. Return to the anchor. Shrink the battle. Take the next correct action. Repeat until the mind remembers who is in command. In the tower, the controller keeps working. The radar screen glows in front of him, no longer just a warning, but a discipline mirror. It shows the sky as it is, not as panic imagines it. It gives him the next detail, then the next, then the next. That is the art of Zanshin under pressure. Attention does not save the moment by becoming loud. It saves the moment by refusing to leave. The fog does not lift. That is the first honest sign of transformation. In weak stories, the world changes the moment a person becomes calm. The sky clears. The noise fades. The danger disappears as if discipline were a magic trick. But in the control tower, nothing becomes easy just because the controller has returned to command. Peak hour is still peak hour. The headset still spits static into his ear. The radar screen still glows with too many moving targets. The tower glass still looks out into a wall of gray. But something has changed. The controller is no longer staring at the screen like a man being judged by it. He is reading it. His eyes move with purpose now, not panic. The green sweep crosses the display, and instead of widening the crisis in his imagination, he narrows his attention to what must be done. One aircraft begins to turn. The data block shifts. The distance opens by a small margin. Not enough for celebration. Enough for work. He listens for the redback. Static breaks across the frequency, and for a moment the words blur. Earlier, that sound would have pushed him closer to paralysis. It would have become one more proof that the situation was slipping beyond his control. Now he treats it as part of the field. Not an insult. Not an omen. Just weather inside the wire. He asks for confirmation again. His voice is level. Not because he feels nothing, but because his feeling no longer owns the microphone. There is a difference between a voice that is naturally calm and a voice that has been commanded into steadiness. In a crisis, the second one matters more. Across the room, other controllers are working their own sectors. Someone adjusts a strip. Someone leans closer to a screen. Someone speaks a clearance in the same clipped rhythm that keeps the whole invisible machine from breaking apart. The tower is not peaceful. It is disciplined. That distinction matters. Peace is what people hope for when pressure is gone. Discipline is what people practice when pressure stays. The second aircraft responds. The controller watches the heading change. The two targets that had been drawing toward the same invisible point now begin to separate. The movement is small on the radar screen, almost unimpressive. A slight shift. A new angle. A little more space where there was almost none. But high-stakes discipline often looks unimpressive from the outside. No speech. No heroic pose. No dramatic music. Just a person returning to the next correct action before fear can turn into paralysis. The controller does not lean back. He does not let relief flood the room. Relief is allowed to exist, but it is not allowed to take command either. That is part of Zanshin. Attention remains after the danger begins to pass. The mind does not abandon the moment just because it wants to feel safe again. He verifies separation. He checks the next aircraft. He clears the frequency. He scans again. The radar screen has now become the third version of itself. At first, it was a threat. It revealed the collision course and exposed the controller's shadow. Then it became an anchor, a place for his attention to return when panic tried to pull him into imagination. Now it becomes a witness. It shows the result of command under pressure. It reflects back a simple truth: the moment did not need him to be fearless. It needed him to remain present. This is the transformation. Not from afraid to unafraid. From frozen to useful. From overwhelmed to exact. From panic-induced paralysis to disciplined attention. The controller still feels the aftershock in his body. His chest may still be tight. His hand may still remember the hesitation. A person does not pass through a high-stakes moment and become a statue. Samurai discipline is not emotional numbness dressed up as strength. It is the ability to keep serving the task while emotion moves through the body. That is modern samurai discipline. Not armor. Not old legends. Not pretending to be above fear. It is a person in a chair, under fluorescent light, with static in the headset, choosing clean action when the mind wants to disappear. The aircraft continue through the fog. Passengers may never know how close the moment became. They may keep reading, sleeping, checking their phones, looking out at nothing but gray. They may never hear the static. They may never see the controller's hand pause above the console. They may never know that somewhere in a tower, a stranger had to defeat the most dangerous kind of hesitation, the kind that happens silently. And maybe that is why this lesson matters. Most of the decisive moments in life do not look decisive to other people. A father choosing not to raise his voice in a kitchen. A student opening the book again after the mind goes blank. A nurse taking one breath before entering the next room. A young employee admitting the mistake before it spreads. A driver pulling over instead of letting anger steer. A person standing in a hard conversation without running into excuses. No fog. No aircraft. No tower. But the same inner test. Static in the mind. A collision course between fear and responsibility. A radar screen of facts that must be read clearly. In the tower, the controller's posture changes by almost nothing. That is what makes it real. He does not become cinematic to himself. He simply becomes available to the work again. His shoulders lower slightly. His scan becomes cleaner. His words become fewer. He is not trying to prove that he is calm. He is too busy being useful. That is the mark of command. When people are immature under pressure, they often want witnesses. They want someone to see how hard the moment is, how much they are carrying, how close they came to breaking. But the disciplined person accepts a colder truth. Sometimes the work must be done without applause, without explanation, without anyone understanding what it costs to stay steady. The controller looks again at the radar screen. Now it does not accuse him. It does not rescue him. It calls him back. Again and again, sweep after sweep, it trains the same principle. Stay with what is real. Do not worship the fear. Do not decorate the crisis. Do not abandon the present for the imagined disaster. Read the field. Speak clearly. Confirm. Continue. Outside the glass, the fog remains. Inside the tower, command has returned. And that is enough. Not because the crisis was small, but because the person inside it became smaller in the right way, less ego, less noise, less imagination, more attention. The art of Zanshin is not the art of seeing everything. It is the art of not leaving the one thing that needs you now. You may never sit in a control tower with two aircraft closing through fog. But you know the feeling. A hard conversation. A deadline. A mistake that must be corrected before it spreads. A moment when everyone is waiting, and your mind wants to freeze behind the noise. That is your radar screen. The lesson is not to become fearless. The lesson is to return to the facts when fear starts inventing disasters. One breath. One clear scan. One honest command. One next action. When static fills your head, do not worship the static. When fog surrounds the moment, do not argue with the fog. Find the screen. Read what is real. Speak cleanly. Continue. And if this message sharpens something in you, carry it into the next pressure you face. Samurai discipline is not about becoming emotionless. It is about becoming trustworthy under pressure.